I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at landroverusa.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
Such a great pleasure always. This is like a mentor to mine we're about to talk to. He's been on the podcast before, Stephen Pressfield. He's written great novels. You might have read the novel The Legend of Bagger Vance or seen the movie, many other great novels. He's also written so many great books about the process of being a great writer, a great artist. Most notably is The War of Art, but also a book called Turning Pro, The Authentic Swing, Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit. I recommend people read all of his books. And finally, the book I've long been waiting for, which is a book about his own personal story and struggle to becoming a great writer and artist. The book's called Government Cheese. And we just have a conversation about everything it takes to break out of the box and do something and master something you love. And he's a very wise person. So happy to talk to Stephen Pressfield. Here he is.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
This is your book. I've read it and reread it. I first read it when you sent it to me, and then I reread it again in the past few days preparing for this podcast, and I just really love the book. And it strikes me, this is the best combination of your writing and also your writing about writing.
Well, thank you very much. That's great. Like yesterday, we finally got the actual books. We had to drive out to the truck terminal, get them off a pallet. So we will send you your version very soon. And I appreciate you reading it, with loose pages. Sorry about that.
No, I really enjoyed it. And first off, you wrote The Knowledge, which was a novelized version of, an aspiring writer, and it was very autobiographical. What made you decide to take the next step in writing a real memoir of your writing career?
This is my life partner, Diana's idea. She sort of pushed me into doing this because she's like, heard all my stories, and she said, you got to tell these things. It's people would love it. And I go, forget it. Who wants to hear, anybody's, their life story, But she kind of pushed me on to do it. And finally, I just said, okay, I'll do it. There was a lot of self-doubt, as you can imagine, writing something like this that's so close to the bone, so self-disclosing. But finally, about halfway through, I decided, okay, maybe this has a chance of being good. Let me keep going.
Well, along those lines, like, you mentioned your marriage to Leslie, which was early on in your career and life, and you're very personal in describing like why that marriage failed. Like, did you talk to Leslie beforehand? Like, I don't know if you're even still in touch with her, but do you say, hey, there's some revelations in here that might surprise you, or she knows everything?
She does know everything, but I sent it to her after it was done just to make sure that she wasn't offended by anything. But I don't think I even told her before I started. But we're good friends now, so everything was okay with her. She actually corrected a few factual things. She said, that really didn't happen like you say it did, that kind of thing. But she was okay with it.
That's interesting that she had to correct things. Like, do you think fiction embellishes or fills in memory in interesting ways? So like, the act of writing, you never writing something down, even if it's as true as possible, is never completely true because memory plays tricks on you.
True. In fact, it's quite wide of the truth a lot of the time, But when I was interviewing people for my book, The Lion's Gate, about the 6-Day War, I was interviewing Israeli fighter pilots and, da-da-da-da. And I found that 3 guys from the same unit would tell you the same story, and it was completely different in each one of their tellings, and they just remembered it differently, It's just, there's something about memory. It's a weird thing.
Yeah. So, one thing we know about you, and you've written a lot about writing in The War of Art and many other books about writing. Like it's been kind of like half your career has been writing, or, as a reader of yours, half the books I've read have been novels and half have been books about writing. And both have been equally good, but it's like 2 different genres that you've mastered. And then, of course, in this book, we read all about your screenwriting adventures as well, which kind of led into the novel writing, as you described so well. But you really bled in the course of becoming a writer. Like, this was a brutal 40 years for you, becoming where you are now.
Well, it's a longer odyssey than for some people than others, and it certainly was a long one for me. It was like, I think 27 years from when I first quit a job to try to write until I actually had my first novel published. So it was a long odyssey, but you know about that, James. You bled, and sometimes it takes a while.
Yeah, I started writing every day in 1990, and then in 2002, I had my first published article where I got money, and then a few years after that, my first published book. But it was a backdoor way. It wasn't a novel. It was a book about finance, and then later I was able to write about my own personal journeys and so on. I think it's a little easier now. We'll get to that. I mean, by the way, James Patterson just had an autobiography come out, and I don't know if you know this, but he spent a good chunk of his career in advertising, just like you. You spent much time in advertising. And what do you think is the role of advertising in kind of like training you about writing?
That's a great question, because I do think it does train you. For one thing, it makes you very aware that nobody wants to read your shit,
Yeah, title one of your books.
That you have to present it in such a way, whatever it is, an ad for Preparation H or your own novel, that it's so compelling that people can't look away from it. Because like, as you know, James, I couldn't get my own mother to read my stuff. I mean, nobody wants to read it. Advertising really focuses the mind that way. Another thing that it really does is it teaches you how to cut stuff, how to edit. A 30-second commercial is like 60 words at the most. And really it should be 40 words or something. And it's not easy to tell a little story in 40 words. I guess people do it now on Twitter or something, but to learn to cut is a really important thing.
It seems like, that applies to so many different areas of writing and performance and storytelling. Like when you were writing, and I'm just kind of skipping around, but when you were writing, when you got into the movie business, and we'll discuss how you got into that in a second, there was one point when your hero asks a question and somebody said to you, take that out. And you're like, why? And the guy says, the hero never asks questions. That stands out for me because I was curious, why does the hero never ask questions? I never thought of it that way. And that's a kind of editing too.
That to me is kind of the way you learn things in this kind of the real world in the School of Hard Knocks. I was working with a director, a guy named Ernie Pintoff, who was a great friend eventually. And we used to work side by side at a table. And he had done a lot of episodic TV. And one of the things that he had done was Hawaii Five-0. I don't know if you remember that, with Jack Lord.
Yeah.
Jack Lord was the star. We're writing a script together, Ernie and me, and I had a question in it. And he said, no. Jack Lord never asked questions. And I thought, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You got to ask questions, But he said, the hero should never be unsure in any moment. Or to change that slightly, the hero of any story has to be so driven, whether it's Rocky or Luke Skywalker or anybody like that, that they never are hesitant in the sense of, where do I go? Asking that kind of a question. Like if you're a detective, if your hero is a detective has to ask questions because he has to interrogate witnesses, right? But they can never be weak questions. They have to be forceful, driving the story forward. So that was a great lesson to me where when I first heard that, I thought, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard, but it's really true.
And it makes sense too, because at first when I was hearing you say this, I was thinking in my head, the devil's advocate, which is that at the beginning of the hero's journey, they're reluctant to go on the journey. But it's not that they're asking questions, why should I go on this? They're actually firm that they don't want to go on this journey. Like in a romance, the man and woman meet each other. It's not like they're unsure, should I ask her out or not? They hate each other.
Right.
They're sure of it.
Yeah, which is a great storytelling principle because the story always has to start from as far away from the finish as possible, right? Emotionally, psychologically, the whole thing. So the lovers that we know are going to get together in the end, they don't want to get together at the start, Or Luke Skywalker, who winds up as a Jedi Knight, the last thing he wants to do at the start is to get involved with this stuff. That's the way it should be.
Right. Like even when Obi-Wan Kenobi says, you need to go and, save the galaxy or whatever, it's not like he asks, can I do that? It's more like he says, I can't do that. I got to work on Uncle Ben's farm.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
But because that was the counterexample I was going to use. But then I realized, no, he was actually pretty firm about being a whiny little farmer at first.
Yeah, right. It's not until Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru get murdered by the Sand People that he has to go. Yeah. But that's part of the hero's journey, as you know, from Joseph Campbell, the refusal of the call, right? The call to adventure comes in and the first thing the hero always does is refuse it.
Well, and actually, I've only read Joseph Campbell through you. So I read this in your books about the arc of the hero. But it also makes me think of the Legend of Bagger Vance. Like, at first, the Matt Damon character, and my memory's so bad, I always forget names. But
Ranulph Juna, I would forget it too if I hadn't read it myself.
Oh, Ranulph Juna, right? Because Arjuna from the Bhagavad Gita, and he's based on that. So he at first really refuses to play. It's not like he's like, am I good enough to play? He's just an alcoholic who's miserable, who refuses to play.
Yeah, which is, that's the hero's journey. It happens. I mean, I'm sure if you and I went through our lives, right, we would have those moments where there is a call to do something, right? To move to another city, to start a new venture, to start a book or something like that. And invariably, at least with me, I'll let you answer for yourself. I always say no at first. It's like, I can't do that. It's too, it's not really me. It's too hard, blah, blah, blah. And I usually have to be talked into it by somebody. And I think that's almost a universal, because the call is scary, whatever it is, to change your life. It's scary.
And the one thing, though, where you didn't question was getting into a writing career. And I think your journey into writing probably mimics many others, which is that, you're working some job. And in this case, I believe it was advertising, right? And a guy in your office, Ed
Hannibal.
Yeah, he wrote a book with a great title, Chocolate Days, Popsicle Weeks, something like that.
Yeah, great memory on your part. Yeah.
Yeah, great title. And you're like, I could do that. And he quit his job. And I think it's that taste of freedom and romance that people want from birth that brings people into a writing career. But then after that, every step of the way, it could be like, for instance, when you had the opportunity to go to Hollywood, were you afraid this was going to draw you away from your true passion, which was writing a novel?
No, I mean, at that point, I had written like 3 novels and none of them were published. None of them went anywhere. Each one took like 2 or 3 years. It was a real all is lost moment for me when the third one kind of failed and couldn't find a buyer. And I just thought, I haven't got it in me to do another 3 years to wind up in this same place. So then I just had it flashed to me, why don't I go to Hollywood? I've failed as a novelist. Let me go out there and fail as a screenwriter. And that actually energized me because I thought, okay, it's a whole new adventure. Let's give it a shot.
And so you go out to Hollywood, you're writing screenplay after screenplay, nothing's getting accepted. What was kind of the tipping point, which had your agent introduce you to the so-called Stanley Duplass, who we don't know what his real name is, but he's a successful producer slash writer. He produced many successful movies, and now you're partners with him. What was the tipping point that kind of gave him, your agent, the industry, confidence that you could partner with this guy?
I'm not sure what was going on. My agent's name was Mike Warner. He was a great guy who died way too soon, tragically young. But he believed in me, and I'd written like probably 9 screenplays then, each one taking about 6 months, and he couldn't sell any of them. So I guess he could see that I was floundering. I really didn't know what a story was. I had some sort of talent, but I couldn't put it together. And meanwhile, Stanley was successful, but he was a producer writer and not really a writer in the sense that you couldn't say to him, Stanley, here's a laptop, write a screenplay. He was much better at working with a partner that would do the writing and then he would guide them, or together you would evolve a story. So it was kind of a good fit. I was desperate. I was willing to do anything and was very happy to be working with an established writer that I could learn from and also that would get us work. Stanley got us work. He was a brand.
And like, even though your prior 9 screenplays were not made into movies, was anybody optioning them? Was there any moving forward at all in the career?
There was only one thing. I don't know if you remember Joe Rubin, who was a director of Sleeping with the Enemy and another movie with Dennis Quaid called Dreamscape. Kind of a young, hot director. He optioned one of them for $3,500. That was like the only glimmer of success in that whole thing.
So what really kept you going? Like, so 3 unpublished novels, which took 3 years, 2 to 3 years each, 9 failed screenplays, which you say take you, so that's another 4.5 years. That's that, and I understand the perseverance, but what kept you going?
I mean, there was no plan B, James. Throughout that period, I worked a bunch of jobs, all kinds of jobs, blue-collar jobs, migrant labor jobs, and then white-collar jobs, advertising, copywriting, stuff like that. And at the end of the day, I would be so depressed that I sort of had to go home and get out the typewriter and just try to write something. And that was like the only thing that would keep me sane. So there sort of was no real choice for me. I couldn't stop.
Were you depressed or were you optimistic? Did you have faith that this is the sort of process that works and eventually this process will pay off?
I don't know. I don't think I really did have faith. I just didn't have any other choice. It was the only thing that kept me sane. So I kept hoping, I would hope 9 screenplays, maybe number 10 is going to sell. That's how you think, right? But I wasn't getting very much feedback. But like I said, my great agent, Mike Warner, he had faith in me. So that made me feel like I must be doing something right.
I mean, that might have been the lifeline for you. Like, let me ask you a personal question. Like, did you ever consider, okay, if this next XYZ doesn't work out, I'm going to kill myself?
I did. In fact, that the moment when I made the decision to go to Hollywood was after the 3rd novel failed. And there was like a rough 3 or 4 days in there where I really was wondering, am I going to splatter my brains all over the wall of this apartment and somebody's going to have to clean it up? So deciding to go to Hollywood sort of saved me. It was a great relief. Oh, great. I don't have to kill myself, at least for another few years.
Yeah. And then, have you ever looked back at the first 3 novels that didn't get published and think, okay, did you go back and look at them and would you say they completely sucked and have no merit? Or would you ever kind of edit them a little bit and publish them?
That's a great question. It's like maybe every 5 years I think about that. But when I read them again, they're just not They're just not good enough. It's not like they suck completely, because I actually had a good agent based on those, but they just were not at the level that you could publish them. Even now, they're just not at that level.
What would you say is the weakest part?
I think that it's a great question, and I think it's a deep question too. I think that what was wrong with them was my ego as a writer was too
Yeah.
prominent in them, in the sense of my need to be validated. I hadn't kind of got out of my own way. It was so obvious that whoever wrote these things was kind of desperate to succeed, rather than just telling a real story straight to the reader.
That's such an interesting point, because sometimes people give me books to read, and I feel the exact same way about these books I read. And also, when I look back at my earlier stuff, there's a lot of ego in them. You can't really give that criticism, like there's too much ego in this. So it's a hard way to couch it. But I think someone can't become a writer until they remove as much ego as possible from their writing. So sometimes the main character, which is clearly based on them, is like a genius character and is the coolest person in the book and can do no wrong. So there's that kind of ego. Sometimes there's ego in the language. Sometimes there's ego in the judgments in the book. And I think, people talk about writing as if, oh, well, can you write a good phrase? Can you write a good paragraph? And that's important. And then there's the storytelling aspect. But the ego aspect is the gate.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, if somebody was to ask me, what was the sort of breakthrough for me that allowed me to finally write something that was publishable, it was somehow switching gears from that ego-based person into sort of becoming invisible in a way, and just sort of surrendering to the story or to what was going on in this tale you're trying to tell, and delivering it to the reader, almost like serving a meal in a restaurant. If you're a chef, right? There's one way you can serve a meal where it's like, look at me, look at this great shit that I put together on your plate, And then there's the other way of serving it where it's just entirely a gift to the person. This is everything I've learned. You're going to love this. And then you, the creator of it, become anonymous and sort of step aside and just let the work itself speak for itself. I know that's not really articulate, but
that's a good way to put it. Like fashioning it as a gift, as opposed to, this is about me. Read this and then look up to me because I wrote this.
Yeah. It's a process of maturing, I think, James. When you say your own self, that when I say ego, it's like the ego of a young person, of a kind of insecure person that's kind of aggressive or trying to draw attention to themselves, et cetera, as opposed to a slightly more mature person that can just do the work, make a great chair, make a great shoe, make a great violin, and then give it to the recipient and say, what do you think about this?
It makes me wonder, like, for kind of everybody loves a prodigy. So every now and then you see someone who's like 21 years old and writes a best-selling novel. But let's look back at like the famous kind of brat pack of writers in the 80s, like Bret Easton Ellis, Jay McInerney, Tama Janowitz. It feels like they didn't have that much ego in their books. I mean, it varies per writer, but it seems like they did a pretty good job doing that.
I mean, think about Bob Dylan. Some people just find their calling at a young age, God bless them, Joni Mitchell, Neil Young. How do they do it at that super young age? I guess maybe they're just evolved souls that somehow, are lucky and they just found their calling at a really early age. And for some of us, like you and me, it takes a longer time.
Yeah, really long time. But, I think some get a little bit lucky too, in that they have some ego on the page, but the story itself helps them remove it. Like, so take your agent, Sterling Lord, who worked with your first book, Legend of Bagger Vance. He did Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And On the Road has some ego in it, but somehow the nature of it, because he's kind of down and out and hitchhiking around and lost himself a little, and he looks up so much to Neil Cassidy, that helps the book remove ego.
Yeah, that's a great point. The book is full of ego, but yet it doesn't. You're right. It's somehow enlisted in the service of the story, so you don't feel at all when you're reading On the Road. And I hope some of our listeners here actually know what On the Road is. Or if they don't, they please read it by Jack Kerouac, a life-changing book. It was written with so much passion, and he cared so much about the people in it and the whole sort of dream, that bebop hipster beatnik dream. He was so in love with it. You forgave whatever ego was in there.
But it's interesting though, like people who try to mimic On the Road or mimic, another great example is Hunter S. Thompson. If you try to mimic Hunter S. Thompson, I often see people mimic poorly because there's too much ego. Whereas Hunter S. Thompson was a great, great writer first, and then has all his, drug-induced wild adventures after. And other people kind of like, it's too much about them. Whereas Hunter S. Thompson knew how to remove the ego from those situations.
Yeah. And, the other thing, of course, is that as you learn in any craft, right, you copy other people, right? You try on. I mean, Bob Dylan, how many people did he copy?
Yeah.
From Woody Guthrie, on down. So to copy Hunter S. Thompson is not a bad thing necessarily. It's sort of a stage. I'm sure that if we had somebody that you had read that did that now, and we were talking to them, they could probably be quite articulate about what they learned doing that, why they set it aside, and why it was sort of a stage on their journey. I hope.
Yeah, I mean, I think what helped me the most, not only, life experience and maturing, but just the kind of writers I started to gravitate to were really great at having almost negative ego, like Raymond Carver, for instance, or some, but not all, of Charles Bukowski is like almost the reverse of ego. And then I just sort of learned from that style, like, oh, okay, this is really working for me.
Uh-huh.
By the way, a lot of this book reminded me in stylistically of Fitzgerald's first novel. I think it's called This Side of Paradise, where throughout the novel, which is a very autobiographical novel of his journey to become a writer, he talks about the books he's reading. And in your book, you talk about in different stages, here's what you were reading and here's who told you to read what. And everybody, even Stanley Duplass, who seems so much like more of a producer than a writer, he's getting you to read the right things, watch the right movies, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I've never read This Side of Paradise, but anybody that compares to Scott Fitzgerald is great. But definitely, I mean, in any field, right, you have to know the canon. And that's one of the things that Stanley taught me, and another mentor in the book, Paul Rink, that would absolutely literally give me lists of things. You must read this. And Stanley was about movies. You must see, Battleship Potemkin, you have to see Gun Crazy or High Sierra or whatever, any of those things. You must know those things. And he's absolutely right. And I find today, you probably find this too, when you're talking with younger people that are aspiring to be movie people or writers or something, and you bring up something like Alien or Blade Runner, and they go, what? And you go, how can you even dream of writing a movie if you don't? You should know those movies scene by scene and shot by shot. And then sometimes you see Martin Scorsese on some of these documentaries or I'm blanking on the guys from Pulp Fiction.
Quentin Tarantino.
Their knowledge is just encyclopedic.
And he worked at a video store, right? So
yeah,
he was watching movies every day, all day.
Every day, all day long, yeah. But you need that, and I'm very grateful to the mentors that I had that made me read stuff and made me watch stuff.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players, and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. Look, PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. I think the mentorship aspect also is very important. Like, I feel like when you were writing your first novels and your first attempts at writing, you didn't really lean into having a mentor very much.
That's true. Actually, I never thought about that until you said it right now. And nothing really started working for me until I did just sort of stumble onto mentors. In fact, the book, Government Cheese, is divided into 7 books, and each one is named after a person, and each one was a mentor to me.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a writing mentor, but another. But you're right. That's sort of how you learn things, I think.
Yeah, I think the benefit of today's day and age is that people can listen to podcasts, can listen to you talk about these things. And I think also there's a lot more meta type of work done. Like you've written not only your novels, but many people know you from your meta works of writing, which is like The War of Art and Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit and things like that. The Authentic Swing is actually one of my favorites. Maybe it's actually one of your lesser known ones, but I love that book because it's all about the process of stealing and how important that is.
Yeah, that's true. I'm glad you like that, James. It's one of my favorites too.
Okay, so let's say there's a layer. So ego is obviously desire is the first layer. You've got a desire to sit down every day and do something unnatural, which is type keys for hours, which is an unnatural physical thing. But then there's this sense that you've got to remove the ego from the text. Then there's what is a story, and like you put earlier, a story is a lot about editing, like editing out. You say in this book something that Kurt Vonnegut has also said, which is like everything the hero does has to move the story forward in some way. And like you say, they can't be unsure because then that's not moving the story in a certain way.
Mm.
And then there's the actual craft of putting down words. And I'll give an example of that from your book. I noticed chapter by chapter, you would sort of decide between past tense and present tense. And I think varying it up is subconsciously for the reader, if they're not specifically looking for that, but it's still very exciting because past tense gives a certain type of emotion and present tense gives a certain type of almost anxiety. And then you even play around with second person in one chapter. I noticed it in the Art is Artifice chapter very briefly.
Yeah. I mean, I must say that in this book was all instinct. I just went by feel on that kind of thing. But to follow let me follow a little bit on what you're saying here, James. Like there's the art. I'm going to talk about writing, but it really applies to everything else, I think. First, there's the desire
Right.
and some sort of talent. Then there's learning the craft of it, right? What's a story? What's an inciting incident? What's an all is lost moment? What's a crisis climax? All those things that you could learn in school. Then there's the kind of what I would call the soft skills, although they're really hard skills, like how do you start something, right? So many people have dreams, but they can't even get started, and that was me too. I can relate to that completely. And then how do you finish something, right? How do you get to the end and have the balls to, put a bullet in the head of the, your own resistance, How do you deal with rejection? How do you deal with criticism? All these skills that nobody teaches you at all. But then above and beyond that, there's a whole mystical side of it, right? Where do, I believe in the muse. I believe in the goddess. I believe that stories come from another place, and they don't teach you that in school either. And that's really we're talking about getting rid of the ego. I think the reason you get rid of the ego is because the goddess hates that fucking ego, and will not give you anything until you serve her and not your own ambition. So how do you learn that skill? That sort of took me, I would say, 30 years before I could kind of let go and surrender and just let it come, let the work come. So that's how you learn to be a writer. And I'm sure it's true in every other creative field or any other field. It's like there are so many of these layers of skills that you have to have that they don't teach you in school. And in fact, I think the way you really learn them, James, is through mentors. You learn them from like somebody that's your boss or that you're working with, or that, where you completely fuck up or you're getting way, way over your head, and a mentor steps in and fixes it. And you say to them, with tears running down your face, how did you do that, man? Tell me, teach me. And I think that's what the evolution of an artist is, I think, acquiring those skills that they don't teach you in school.
I think you're right, too, that those skills include almost side effect skills like dealing with rejection. Like dealing with rejection is not a writing skill, but it's a skill that writers must have.
Right. And everybody must have, right? Entrepreneurs must have any kind of, that anybody does anything, starting a restaurant, dealing with your children,
And the mentorship aspect, again, it's not as if you need Ernest Hemingway to be your mentor. Stanley Duplass might not have been a better writer than you, but he was able to teach you about writing. And by the way, there's one other thing you just said in there, which has been sort of subtext to this, which is they don't tell you what to do. They tell you what not to do is more valuable. Like,
Yeah.
let's say you give your mom your book and your mom says, "Oh, Stephen, it's wonderful." You actually just got zero information about your book from your mom.
Yeah.
But if someone says, "I didn't read it because," then whatever happens after the because, that is valuable information.
It is. It's life-changing information. Like when something completely fails and somebody just tells you, some horrible thing, and you have to go home and just beat your brains out of like, what did I do wrong? How did I miss that? How did I not see what I was, and then how do I change it? What makes it, what can I do to make it work? Those are those moments when you really dig deep and you actually do change.
I get the sense, particularly when you were in Hollywood, you had a feeling this is going to be great. This is going to be great. And then it doesn't happen. And maybe you learn why, maybe you don't, and you go on to the next thing. But I get the sense there was a different quality with Legend of Bagger Vance, which, by the way, I highly recommend. If you haven't seen the movie, read the book, then see the movie. But I got the sense that when you had the idea of the Legend of Bagger Vance, which was a very unusual type of story, I could say it's a golf novel, but that's not what it is at all. But I had the sense that you felt something else, that you felt for sure this was going to work. Like, what was that different quality and feeling between that and, let's say, Cryptic, which was a screenplay you loved writing?
That's a very astute observation, James. And I do think that, and I've tried to put my finger on this, and without success, but certainly the Legend of Bagger Vance was the first time that the muse was really with me, that I was finally doing something that was from my own heart, even though the book itself surprised me. And all the way through writing it, I thought, this is the dumbest idea I've ever had. Who possibly is going to be interested in a mystical novel about golf? It's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. So I had no confidence in it at all as I was doing it. But I was absolutely seized by it in terms of, I have to do this, and I have to do it exactly this way. So you're right. The last few screenplays that I wrote before The Legend of Bagger Vance were good. They never got made. They're just sitting in a drawer somewhere. But they were really good, but they were not, it was a qualitative leap to The Legend of Bagger Vance. And I think that, to get really deep on this, James, I really feel like if we could look into the higher dimension, the dimension on which the gods and goddesses live, they were saying to me up to that point, we're not going to help you yet. You're not worthy yet. You haven't earned it yet. And then at that point with Bagger Vance, the goddess said, okay, I'm going to step in now. I'm going to help you. And knock wood, it's been that way ever since.
And that really is interesting because you really made a lot of sacrifice to make that novel, in the sense that your agent at the time, a guy named Frank, was like literally begging you. He said he basically implied you were right at the tipping point of having a massive career in Hollywood. And you were arguing with him that you weren't going to have that. And he's like, no, this is how it works. You've already succeeded. Now we just have to cash in. And I'm paraphrasing him. And you left that to go back to your first love, which was writing novels, even though he said you're finished, bud. Like you're fired as my client.
Well, yeah, that's exactly true. And from Frank, my agent's point of view, he was exactly right, because he had put in like 4 or 5 years of work to get me going, a lot of work, schmoozing with people and et cetera, putting my stuff before people. And now I was just flat out abandoning him, to write a book, which he couldn't do anything with, So he was right to, fire me and be pissed off at me. But as I said, I was just so seized by this idea that I just had to do it. It was the call of the hero's journey. You just had to do it.
I don't think I would have done it. I think if when I was reading,
I think you would have, from what I know about you, James. I think you would have.
But I don't know, like it must have felt so good to get so much approval. Like this guy was saying, Hollywood's ready for you, Stephen. Like the Oscars are next. And he said he offered you so many alternatives. Like Can you do it on the side? Can you do it on weekends? And I probably would have just bullshitted him and said, yeah, I'll do that. Tell me the next screenplay assignment. I don't know. I don't know what I would have done because, you were looking so long for approval. And just when you finally get it, you said no to it. That really is the hero's journey. And you did it. I think that's a tough thing. I think 9 out of 10 people or 99 out of 100 people would have said, heck, I'm in Hollywood. I'm going to write screenplays. I'm going to, hang out with, on the red carpet and whatever. I think that was hard what you did, but that feeling of seizure of the story must have really, that's why I noticed it was like a qualitative difference than things you felt before about stories.
Yeah. It's a mystery. I wish I had some videos from that time and I could interview myself, but I know that there wasn't any real doubt. I just had to do it.
And then, on top of it, as you describe in The Authentic Swing, but I think many people noticed it before you wrote that, you kind of mapped the Legend of Bagger Vance onto the story of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the most popular story, let's say, in world history. Like 1 billion people in India, love every beat in that story. And I think it's a really good insight too, which again, you talk about this in The Authentic Swing, so I won't dwell on it too much, but this good insight that, hey, lots of things have been written over the past 3,000 years. Maybe 5 of them are texts that we still know about. So might as well follow the kind of structure or skeleton of something that's been followed by 1 billion people for the past 2,500 years. We could do it too. And that's the Legend of Bagger Vance, beat by beat, follows this classic story without anyone realizing it, and it works.
But I will say this in my own defense of that was not in any sense a cynical decision at all. It was just, I just thought this classic structure of the Bhagavad Gita works absolutely for this other story. It's just a way of combining two things that have never been combined. But I am definitely a believer in stealing from the classics. If you can do Romeo and Juliet again, do it. It works. There's a reason why certain things work.
And it's also, that's a very different novel than novels that you wrote later. Like a lot of those were historical and they were fiction that is taking place, beautiful stories that are taking place during various wars. And that one just stands out as like an odd, like it's a classic. That one's definitely already withstood the test of time, and it will always be a great novel.
Well, thank you for that. But, this it sort of in the novel that came after that, Gates of Fire.
Yeah.
That was about the Battle of Thermopylae, but not the one that the movie 300 was made from. I had the very similar feeling, James, where I thought, this is another really dumb idea that nobody's going to be interested in. A story that from a place that nobody can pronounce, nobody can spell, 2,500 years ago, not American. Who's going to care about this? And I'm going to put 2 years into this or more without any money behind it. But again, I was just absolutely seized by it and just had to do it. And it was a great experience doing it. I mean, I loved it all the way through.
And the other thing about your career, which I don't feel like I did, and I wonder if this was a time period thing where you were willing to take any job at all to keep writing every day. So you're a truck driver, you did crappy work for ad agencies, you just took all these, you were picking apples. Was that in the quest for adventure and material? Or was it just like, I need to do mindless things so I can focus all my mental energy on my true dream?
Actually, when I was doing a bunch of those jobs, like driving trucks and picking fruit and stuff like that, I was not writing at all. In fact, that was kind of a period where I had just given up in despair. And I kind of carried my old typewriter with me in my 65 Chevy van, but I never got it out, never tried to write. I was really, at that point, I was just trying to survive, James. I was just so I was not looking for experience or adventure, even though I think all that stuff helped. But it wasn't till, I finally did sit down and try to write again. This was after my first book completely collapsed. I know this is kind of boring and confusing, but no, I was really running away from writing all that time. It was really, I was in the throes of capital R resistance to the call. It was refusal of the call, big time.
And during that period, do you think you were depressed?
Uh, Not really. I mean, I was like, it was sort of like down and out type of time, but so many of the things that I did were so challenging to me in a good way that I really was really involved in them and committed completely to them. Like learning to drive trucks was something I had never thought I would ever do, but I was just completely caught up in the difficulty of it and trying to learn it.
Do you think no matter what we do, even if we do something like driving trucks, we find ourselves in a hierarchy. So you're driving trucks, and just like with writing, you didn't feel like you were good at it. Like there was Byron and there was other people who were driving trucks better than you somehow. Like you put yourself in this hierarchy and you were honored to be in their midst at different points. I wonder if there's a way to avoid hierarchy in activities we do. Because that's like a source of being down and out is like you feel down versus others.
But the other side of it is, at least the way I felt like I was really blessed to be in this hierarchy, even though I was the youngest and the newest and the one that and at the very bottom of the hierarchy. But it's like being in the military too. If you're like a buck private or something like that, or a young lieutenant, thank goodness you have, captains and majors and so above you that will help you and be mentors to you. So these guys at the trucking company I just really admired them. And, when they would teach me things, I would just, soak it up with every cell of my body. So I think the hierarchy was a good thing there.
I wonder if that's a kind of meta skill, which is you had already spent some time writing, but without mentors. Then you get into the trucking business. Suddenly you're able to acknowledge what a mentor is, respect them, and learn from them. I wonder if that is where you learned, oh, even if it was at subconscious level, oh, I need a mentor. I need somebody who's going to guide me now in this writing thing. And again, it might have been a subconscious thing, but that was part of your maturing is that you had to switch careers into something you cared less about in order to respect having a mentor.
And that may be true. I never thought about that at all till you just said it right now. But I certainly had a bunch of mentors in that career. And after that, I did have mentors in the writing career. So maybe there's something to that.
It seems like in Hollywood, movies are an interesting thing because you can't have an extra scene. It'll distract the audience. They'll just get bored. So like if you read Mario Puzo's The Godfather and then you watch the movie, there are enormous 100-page sections of that book that were cut out because they really would have been too much in the movie. And do you think in Hollywood is where you were, you most learned the hero's journey, the arc of a story?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm probably too Hollywoodized in the sense, that the sort of principles of storytelling that I know are all movie principles, And you're right. Like those subplots in Mario Puzo's The Godfather, you have to get rid of them for a movie because, like you say, the audience will go to sleep. If you do Sonny's adventures as a lover, right? His cheating on his, that just doesn't have anything to do with the actual story. Because in a movie, you've only got like 90 minutes or 100 minutes, and you have to keep the audience. The audience is not allowed to go take a leak. You can't go outside and smoke a cigarette. If you do, from the movie maker's point of view, you've lost them, right? You got to keep them in the seat for that 90 minutes, 100 minutes, 110 minutes. So there can't be any fat. That's what I learned. That's what I imbibed. I'm probably still guilty of, following those principles.
You don't mention it so much in this book, but you mentioned in, I believe it was The Knowledge, about your time working on stories for porn movies. Since that was in The Knowledge, I have to ask if that was fiction or not. But I think you've mentioned it in other places. I forget. But what do you think? Did you learn it even more in porn movies? Because they have to cut everything out as much as they can, but still keep enough of a story to justify it as a movie. But, obviously there's a lot of cutting out.
I only wrote like one rewrite on a porn flick. But I learned like two great things. You want me to be long-winded and tell those two things here?
Yes.
So I remember
none of this is long-winded, by the way.
The producer who was like a really nice family man. He took me out to breakfast and before I started on this rewrite because he wanted to make sure I didn't screw up this rewrite. And he said, okay, here's two things I want you to do, kid. He said, let's see, what were they again? He said, anytime the couple are screwing, make sure that the plot advances. Don't just have it be talk, 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 screw, screw, screw. If it's let's say the male is a detective and the girl is a waitress or whatever it is, while they're in bed, have some nugget that advances the story. And I thought, wow, that is really interesting thing. And what I sort of applied it to was action movies, and thinking that if there's a fight or a gunfight or a car chase, don't let the movie stop. There's got to be something that happens in that chase or in that fight. The cop finds out that so-and-so was whatever, to advance the story. And then the other thing that the porn producer said to me was, whenever there's a screwing scene, always have something else going on at the same time. Like, for instance, if it's the wife and the pool repair guy, and they're in the bedroom, have the husband coming home unexpectedly in the middle of the day and unbeknownst to his wife. And then he says, we can cut back and forth from the couple in bed to the husband coming home. And now you got something interesting going on. So I always thought that was another great thing. And Ridley Scott does this tremendously in movies. He never has a scene where there's just one thing happening. Something's going on off screen or within the scene that's complementary or contradictory to the main thrust. And were two great lessons from one breakfast in Santa Monica with this guy.
I'm trying to think of an example. Like, so Ridley Scott did Blade Runner. Can you give an example from Blade Runner?
Let me see. I'm probably going to blank on this, but one thing Ridley Scott does visually is he always will fill the screen. If Thelma and Louise are in the foreground doing something, there's something else going on, in the depth in the background or something, but he'll always have some extra thing happening.
Oh, that's interesting. Because now that you say that, I do think of that. Like, that's why there's so many Easter eggs in Blade Runner where the detective, sometimes he would leave these origami things in odd places.
Oh, right.
You wouldn't even notice
Edward
that.
James Olmos.
Oh, yeah, Edward James Olmos. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it makes me think of David Lynch also. Like, in the very first Twin Peaks, it's all these students are sitting in a classroom, and you only see way in the background, outside a window of the classroom, someone is running past screaming, and you never find out what that's about or why, but it's just in the background. And I always thought, it must be fun to do this job where thinking of these crazy things in the background. Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main, that's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional, and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com. This is such a valuable service for all business owners, big businesses, small businesses, doesn't matter. I wish I had this in the many different businesses that I've started. Sometimes it seems like your business is humming, but then suddenly you don't understand it. You're starting to fall behind. You're not understanding where your costs are, where your revenues are, where your payments are. Teams are buried in all sorts of like BS work, and you can't seem to close the books. So you need like one dashboard, one source of truth. I'm jealous of this business, NetSuite from Oracle, of course, NetSuite by Oracle. I wish I'd come up with this idea. It's a brilliant concept to have all your business intelligence on one dashboard. This is why you need to know these three numbers: 37,000, 25, and 1. So 37,000, that's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind. So you get a customized solution for all of your key performance indicators, your KPIs, in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need to grow all in one place. So right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/James. That's netsuite.com/James to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/James. This starts to get into craft where there's all sorts of things about craft. Like we discussed earlier, how you switch tenses occasionally. And again, you said that was instinctual, but that's learned over time. Chuck Palahniuk, who wrote Fight Club, he talks about this in his book about writing Consider This, that it's interesting to play around with first person, second person, third person, all within the same.
Yeah, he does that great. Yeah.
And then there's other things too, which we touch upon, but it's like shortening sentences, no fluff. And this is something a lot of people don't do.
Yeah. But another thing that I picked up on from reading his book, he talks about kind of, I think he calls it the big voice and the little voice.
Oh, yeah.
The little voice is sort of the voice that tells the story, but then say it's a first person narrator. The first person narrator will shift gears, pull back, and start to talk about life in general. Hemingway does that a lot. He's talking about he's miserable, and his character, Jake Barnes, in The Sun Also Rises. And then he'll pull back to that big voice and he'll say, yeah, it's one thing to say that you're tough at 12 in the afternoon, but it's another thing entirely to do it at 2 in the morning. And it's a great shift that I don't even know why it works, but it does work.
Yeah, and you have to really be good to pull it off because there's that ego aspect, which is why does the character know this?
Yeah.
I think with The Sun Also Rises, which is his first novel, and like comparing that to Old Man and the Sea, for instance, essentially his last novel, in A Movable Feast, sometimes he makes judgments where you feel like it's Ernest Hemingway making the judgment and not the character, and that's where the ego's in there. Which is why that was a great novel, but maybe it wasn't his best.
But then again, like in A Movable Feast, which I loved, you sort of want to hear what Hemingway thinks.
Right, which is why that works as a
Hemingway
memoir.
himself,
Yeah.
Yeah. I got a question for you, James, a technique question. Did you see The Fabelmans?
No.
Spielberg's movie?
The Fabelmans? I don't even think I heard it.
Oh, it's just came out now, and The Fabelmans is sort of like his family. And it's kind of the story of a young kid in Arizona who wants to be a filmmaker. And it's very autobiographical. Although I can't ask you this question now because I'll ruin the final scene for everybody that's listening.
In this book, Government Cheese, you mentioned writers who write about their own aspiring quest to be writers. So you mentioned the novel Hunger by Knut Hansen.
Down and Out in London and Paris by George Orwell.
Yeah. And then other writers in that category are Bukowski, certainly, Post Office, which you mentioned. I mean, Post Office, he wants to be a writer, but he's not publishing, so he has to take this horrible job at the post office for 25 years or however long it was.
Henry Miller.
Henry Miller, yeah, and you quote Henry Miller, and you ascribe to them a calling you felt you didn't have, but clearly you had it as well.
Yeah, I did, but I didn't know it. I was like um uh so racked by self-doubt and way beyond self-doubt, self-annihilation, that I just thought, who are you to even think about trying to write something? You've got no education that prepared you for this, et cetera, et cetera. So I wish I could have had to be on fire with it like these guys were. But I thought, I have no business doing this at all, but I'm just trying to save my life, just try to write my way out of being as depressed and as screwed up as I am.
And clearly that was, since we know that was not correct information you were telling yourself, that was the resistance trying to prevent you from sitting down and writing. And for these other guys like Knut Hansen, he would literally go hungry as opposed to stop writing, and hence his novel Hunger. It's an interesting genre, the kind of writing, writing a novel about wanting to be a writer. We
Yeah.
see this from so many great novelists. I don't know what my question was with that, but I think those are just great novels, and you notice it as well. You mentioned them, but again, it struck me when reading this. This book is your Hunger.
Yeah, I mean, I hoped it was. That's really what it's about. My own version of that.
Yeah.
Knut Hamsun turned out to be a pretty bad guy. Do you know anything about his?
No, I have only read Hunger by him.
Turned out to be a Nazi, among other things.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But it goes to show, the book is fantastic. Hunger by Knut Hamsun. But yeah, he turned out to be kind of a bad guy.
I guess it's also like Celine was sort of a writer like that as well. Different style, but Journey to the End of the Night, things like that. But he also turned out to be not such a great guy.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I guess, artists, there's no guarantee that they're going to be, they may write with the compassion and empathy, but a lot of times they don't live that way.
But, I wonder, I've been kind of having this theory lately, more out of annoyance at myself, but everybody's either, let's call it in this case, everybody's either a writer or a bird watcher. So to be a writer, or in some cases an entrepreneur, in some cases an athlete, something that requires some degree of self-awareness as well as peak performance, and which requires years or sometimes decades to master. You could either be that, or it's perfectly fine being a bird watcher, where you just have a little book. Oh, I saw a hyacinth macaw today, and yeah, you go to places like Africa and you have binoculars, and this is so beautiful. Like, I feel like I wish I were a bird watcher, and it consistently, I just do stuff that is painful. And do you think that's a true dichotomy?
What's your conclusion from that?
That I'm probably mentally ill to some extent, and that's why a lot of these writers and artists are just, a lot of them go in directions that turn out to be not so healthy. I'm not saying I'm going in that direction, but I'm saying it's such a hard thing, and it's very unpleasant. Like you said, you were going to go to Hollywood and maybe blow your brains out if it didn't work. Like, bird watchers never say, if I don't see a hyacinth macaw, I'm going to blow my brains out. Like, they never say that. So what is it? Which is the better? Do you ever wish you were like, oh man, I wish I could have just been a partner at a law firm and done that for 15 years and then retire and made $2 million a year on being a partner, and boom.
No, I never wish that at all. But I do like the idea of bird watching. I mean, if you think of that in kind of a Zen sort of a way, you're just kind of, instead of doing, you're being, right?
Yeah.
You're just living life. You're appreciating the beauty of the world and, smelling the flowers and that kind of thing. Sometimes I think, I wish I could be that kind of person, but I'm not. I'm driven, maybe it's from previous lives. I sort of feel like I've fallen behind somehow and I've got to catch up,
Yeah.
or that, I've got stuff I have to do, even though I don't know what it is. And if I don't do it, I'm going to be miserable.
Right. And it's painful because, to your point, when you had this self-doubt and you said, who am I to, essentially, I'll finish the thought, like, who am I to write a book that even one other person's going to want to read? Like, you have to have like a huge ego to think anyone gives a shit about what you want to say, and that means you're going to put yourself through a lot of pain, because when you start out, you're not that person. You have to withstand that period where you become that person. And it's very painful, as opposed to the Birdwatcher. And maybe I'm wrong about bird watching. So listeners who are bird watchers could tell me, look, I went through a lot of hell before I became a great bird watcher. But clearly that, making a sword by fire, I don't know, it's just a hard way to live. And I can't seem to live any other way, and is the problem.
Yeah, that's it for me too. I can't live any other way either.
And we've talked about this before, the kind of sacrifice, even personally, although, I would say you're looking at you, it seems to me that you have the elements of well-being and contentment with your life, and probably some, happiness. But like, even now at your age, like, how old are you right now?
79.
79. Oh my gosh. I was going to say 72, but, and I was being honest. Like my wife asked me earlier, how old is he? And I said, I think he's like 71, 72, 79. So in a year, you're 80, which quite frankly is old, right?
Yes.
But you're still, I would say the one transition you've had in, let's say, since middle age is that you have begun writing these mentorship style books like The War of Art and Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit and
That's
The
true.
Authentic
That's
Swing,
true.
Turning Pro. So, and you've mastered that art form as well. Like, that's a really great art form where you've inspired many people. And that seems like a natural shift to keep, as opposed to always wanting to write an Oscar-winning movie or like the best novel in the world. It seems like, moving into some type of mentorship seems like a natural progression.
That's true. Although I haven't stopped, this was one, A Man at Arms from a year ago, and Government Cheese is another one, so I feel like these mentorship type of things I'm doing on the side.
Yeah.
That's not my real profession. But you're right. It is at a certain age, I think you do kind of evolve out of, even Rocky stopped fighting in the ring and began training other boxers,
Right. But is there ever a point now where you're disappointed, like, oh, this novel didn't do this, or, oh, I don't have this many followers after doing this? Like, is there ever a point where you have that kind of youthful disappointment in some kind of like, career-like thing?
I mean, I think you're always disappointed, right? I mean, everybody, you finish something and it's never as good as you hoped it was. You wish it had found a bigger audience or whatever. But for me, the conclusion I've kind of come to as far as my writing is it's a practice that I'm going to do, like a yoga practice or a martial arts practice or whatever, for its own sake, until they take me out feet first. I'm going to keep trying to do the next best thing, that next best idea that the goddess gives me. Just try to do it as well as I can.
So let's go 10,000 feet higher from that statement, which is, what is it about doing the process that you think delivers meaning, not only to you, but perhaps the people around you, perhaps the community around you, perhaps to the world around you?
I'm a believer in another dimension of reality, right? In a higher dimension of reality. And on that dimension, there is the source of all ideas, whatever you want to call it, the muse or source with a capital S or whatever. And I feel like that energy flows through some of us, maybe all of us, but certainly through me, and I'm sure through you too, James, constantly. And it demands that we enact it. It's our job as material beings to bring into existence ideas and stories or whatever. If we were musicians, it would be songs. If we were choreographers, it would be dances. It's our job to bring that into this world. And that flow, that kind of underground river, never stops. And it seems to me that if you ignore that, I'm just speaking for myself, but probably for you too. If we ignore that, we're going to get sick and we're going to get crazy and we're going to go down a very bad rabbit hole. And so we don't even have a choice. We've got to respond to that river that's flowing through us. And thank God it is. So that's how I live my life. And age doesn't mean a fucking thing to me, As long as I can still punch a key, on a keyboard, then I'm okay. Thank goodness I'm not a professional athlete because I'd have a tough time doing that. But, as long as you got your sanity and you got a keyboard, you can keep working.
Well, I think for writers also, the one type of intelligence that increases after the age of 50 is the ability to extrapolate from experience and find wisdom from experience. So that helps, as opposed to an athlete, that helps professions like writing or historian, those types of professions.
Yeah. But also, I think each one that you do, each book that you do, this is just my feeling, I feel like an innocent. I feel like a virgin. It's always a new challenge. The solution is always something you've never done before. And as you enter on each project, it's always a mystery. And like Seth Godin says, this might work, this might not work.
Mhm.
You never know. And usually you're wrong when you think you do know.
Like right now, there's other forms of media that are amazing, right? I'm not saying amazing versus anything else, but they're just new forms. Like I don't know if you've ever done this. Have you ever scrolled down like TikTok videos?
No, I haven't.
Okay. If you just try it once, there are like kids on there, and by kids, maybe anywhere from the ages of 15 to 30, whatever. There are kids on there that are like have superpowers. They're jumping from building to building. They're doing magic tricks. They're dancing these dances. They're hilarious doing these funny interviews. Like it's a real great source of entertainment by people who are good performers. And do you ever view that? I don't know what the statistics are on like more people reading novels than ever. I always seem to hear that in the background, but somebody must be leaving reading to watch TikTok videos.
Yeah. So are you asking me, am I going to become a TikTok person?
No, but do you worry that that's competition for writers in generations to come?
It is for sure. But I also think I'm open going forward to doing any media whatsoever. It's all fascinating stuff, except I'm not going to buy Donald Trump's superhero NFTs.
I wouldn't do that either. So probably worthless. But you bring up an interesting point, because I sometimes think writers are performers. They're sort of like performers in hiding, because writing a story is a form of performance. It's just you're not there physically performing.
For sure. Absolutely. Yes.
Now, do you feel, though, there are less readers now than there were 20 years ago?
It's a great question because, I keep reading like you. I read like, oh, the book business is bigger than ever. But yet when I look around at my friends, I see nobody's reading a damn thing, And when you mention anything, any title or something like that, people look at you like, what's that? Never heard of it. So people are reading, but I'm not sure who they are.
Yeah, people are reading. And I think, they always say women are reading. I don't know if that's,
I hear that too.
Yeah. But clearly there must be some men reading, right? Who's reading?
Men I know, because they write to me.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't really know that many. I don't really go on, let's say I go on a train. I don't really see people reading a book. They're usually like watching videos. And I wonder if what that suggests long term for not the art of storytelling, but storytelling in text, if that's going to change. Like in Japan, for instance, novels have become smaller. Like they're not necessarily 300 pages, and that's been a trend over the past 30 years. Yeah.
On the other hand, there's a bunch of little kids in my family, and my nieces and nephews' kids, and they're all avid readers, 8 years old, 10 years old, something like that. You put a book in their hands and they just love it. So
that's good to know.
They might not be reading Hemingway; they're reading some other little simpler stuff. But so somebody is out there reading.
What's the book you would recommend to people who want to read that will inspire their writing?
Just what this has just popped into my head. Is The Moviegoer by Walker Percy. Are you familiar with that one, James?
Yeah. That's the one also. I think Ryan Holiday recommends that one a lot as well.
Oh, does he? Just as a great, sly, funny, interesting. It won the National Book Award, I think, in 1962. So it's not a contemporary book at all. It's a book I love. I read it like once a year.
Oh, really? It's funny. I think there are a couple of go-to books that I read once a year because I think it fuels my writing. Like I think to myself, like particularly whenever I'm a little bit down on my own writing, I'll read one of these and it'll get my juices going. Like, oh, this is magic. This is what it's about.
What are those books?
Like there's a book of short stories called Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson about this drug addict. All the stories are interwoven about this one drug addict. The character's name is Fuckhead. You never really learn his real name. And it's a beautiful set of short stories. It's sort of like The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. That
Yeah,
collection of
that's a
short
great
stories
one.
too.
Yeah.
Raymond Carver short stories.
Ah,
I mean, I love novels, but short stories are sort of that halfway point between poetry and novels where I think a lot of great writing happens. And so that gets
yeah.
my juices going.
I'm actually more of a movie person in terms of, finding inspiration. You see a great movie, or even for me, even a half-assed movie that just sort of works, and that's inspiring to me. When the final credits roll, I go, oh man, I want to get back to work. And whatever I was doing I got to work harder on it.
Yeah, movies for me, television for me actually, because I think
Television too, yeah.
I think a lot of the best writing now is in television, just because you get this much greater arc. You have time to unravel your story. And I've always loved television. When I had my 3 or 4 failed novels that were awful after years and years of work, my first job after that was not truck driving, but HBO, because I loved television so much. I did whatever I could to work at HBO. So I was a computer programmer there. I just love television.
Yeah, there certainly is a lot of great stuff. Although now I think it's almost like the great wave has passed, in my opinion. The great wave of Breaking Bad and The Sopranos and Game of Thrones, and now we're in kind of the backwash of, I watched what is it, the House of the Dragon? Did you see that?
No, I haven't, because I agree with you. I think the golden age was from about 2004 to about 2015.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's kind of gone. The Wire and things like that. Now I don't know what it is. It's the bastard children, of those great works.
Yeah, and so even if there is something good, it's harder to find. It's like a needle in a haystack.
Yeah,
but this
maybe
brings
it's all
up
on TikTok, like you're saying.
Yeah, it could be that the best writers are doing TikTok videos
Yeah.
now. But let me ask you, with all these streaming services and 7,000 shows, when we were growing up, there were 3 channels. Now there's a billion. And why is it? And every TV show has a writer's room with 10 writers. So why is it still competitive for many people to get a job at writing when there's 100,000 new writing jobs
I don't know.
out there?
That's a great question. There must be a lot of people trying to do it. I see all the stuff that's on TV, and I say, hey, how come nobody's making my stuff? Mine's better than that shit. But so I don't know. There must be a lot of people out there looking for work.
Yeah, and a lot of bad stuff gets produced too. I think about my own stuff. I probably pitched a dozen TV shows that I felt really seriously about, and nothing got made. And I guess it's
I'm
just
surprised
the
to
nature
hear
of it.
that. I would think your stuff would be right up people's street.
I had literally Spielberg asking me for ideas, but then they wanted to find a writer to do them, and they couldn't find a writer to do them. So, and I'm like, I'll do them, and they're like, no, you're not a television writer. But Steve Pressfield, you whether you know or not, you've been a serious mentor to me even before we had our first podcast, which our first podcast was in person in Malibu at your house. And I really appreciate just all the things you write and all the conversations we have. And I feel bad. Sometimes I'm so bad at responding to emails. Sometimes I don't always respond quickly to emails, but I always appreciate our discussions and learn so much.
Well, I feel the same way, James. You don't know it, but you're a mentor to me too.
No,
I really
nonsense.
admire the way your mind works and the choices you've made in your life. The crazy things that you've done, and you've gone out on a limb so many times. God bless you. You're an inspiration to me.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. I'm gonna frame this clip of the podcast. But this book, Government Cheese, is a must read. It's about that struggle. It's about this is what everybody was curious about when you were writing The War of Art and other books like that. You were giving us little bits and pieces one time I worked on this movie and blah, blah, blah. But now we get the story in this book, and it's a cliffhanger book. And by the way, this leads, I do have another question. This leads to the craft. I noticed, you begin and end many chapters with a cliffhanger. You even begin with a cliffhanger. So there was one chapter, I wrote down the quote, "The first year at the orchard, we came upon a dead body." So that was the first line of one of the chapters, which of course is a cliffhanger in the first sentence. And this is a more technical question, but how often, particularly in this world we live in, which is short-term attention, how often do we need a cliffhanger? Is it every paragraph? Is it every chapter? Is it every sentence?
I think you need quite a few of them. I think, again, it's sort of the concept of nobody wants to read your shit, right? So you can't just write nothing. The start of a chapter or the start of anything has got to hook you a little bit somehow. And I do always try to kind of leave it on a cliffhanger a little bit, leave something that makes the reader want to turn the page to the next chapter. I'm always trying to do that.
Every chapter, are you thinking of the arc of the hero? So not only does the book itself have to have the hero's journey, the arc of a story, does every chapter, does every paragraph? Like,
I think it does. I think it does. Yeah. There has to be momentum because it's nobody wants to read your shit, right? It's like at every moment, I picture the reader as getting bored, getting tired. I got a lot of other distractions. I got to write, I got to go to the grocery store. So somehow I've got to keep the reader's attention. And I'm constantly trying to do that.
Well, sorry I asked those questions after what seemed like the conclusion. But for listeners out there, wait until you see what I do next podcast. But thanks again, Stephen. I super appreciate you coming on the podcast. And government cheese for everyone out there. We didn't even talk about the origin of the title, but you'll get it when you'll figure it out when you read the book. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks, James. I've come on anytime. It's great to hang out with you. You're a wonderful guy. I love you, man. Thanks a lot.
Stay here. Thank you so much, Stephen.
I'll come on anytime.
Excellent. I'm going to take you up on that.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jim Perdue of Perdue Chicken. Unlike our competitor, who's gone back to feeding their chickens antibiotics, we at Perdue will remain no antibiotics ever. No antibiotics ever because we raise our chickens in a healthy environment, so they don't need them. No antibiotics ever takes more time and money, but it's the right thing to do. So when you buy chicken, look for the Perdue label to make sure your chicken is no antibiotics ever. Get the facts at Perdue.com.
It's time to save. Clear the Rack is on at your Nordstrom Rack store. For a limited time, take an extra 25% off clearance. All sales are final. Hurry, shop this sale at Nordstrom Rack today. Please see nordstromrack.com or ask a store associate for details.